We will call to order the Thursday, October 1st, 2020 meeting of the Landmarks Commission. The first item on tonight's agenda is the roll call. So if you can, just please answer present when I call your name. Herman Stoyer.
Present.
Justin.
Here.
Ron.
Present.
Ian.
Present.
David.
Present.
And Susan is absent. Second item on the agenda for tonight is the approval of tonight's agenda. I think you've all got it in the packet. Stephanie just sort of went through how we think tonight is going to work. Does anybody have any suggested changes or revisions to the agenda?
No.
Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as is.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor of approval of tonight's agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is the approval of the minutes from the September 16th, 2020 Landmarks Commission. Does anybody have any comments, corrections, or changes to those minutes?
No.
Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion. Okay. I'll second.
Any other discussion? With no discussion, all those in favor of approval of the September 16th minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. So we are now on to item E, which is the informational presentations by 3 firms for the request for proposals for intensive resource survey.
All right, I see that we have Jennifer here. I'm not sure, JC Mill, are you part of the Legacy team as well?
No, I am from UW Milwaukee. I'm changing my screen name right now.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'm going to boot you out of the meeting for now while this presentation occurs, and then you can hang out in our waiting room until your firm is up. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Great, thank you. And then Jennifer, I will be making you a co-host so you can share out your screen with us. All right, so you should be able to share that. Great. All right, so Jennifer, just so you're aware, who we have here is all of the members of our Landmarks Commission minus Susan. So you've got most of the board here. Myself and Jason Flatt, both are staff members of the Landmarks Commission. And then we've got Dinah from the SHPO office.
Oops. Okay, so can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
And everybody can see the screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, then I'm gonna get right into it. Let's see here. Here we go. So for calling us in for an interview, we're very excited about the opportunity to work on this project. We think it aligns with a lot of other work that we've been doing across the state. Legacy Architecture is an architectural design and a historic preservation consulting firm. We are located in Sheboygan, being probably the closest of the consultants that you're interviewing this evening. And we really have this passion to preserve the past, design for the present, and plan for the future. And intensive resource surveys are part of that planning for the future. Over the last 15 plus years, actually 18 years, we've really become a statewide leader in our preservation services, and we can offer a full spectrum that some communities find interesting because not only can we provide the consulting services, but we could do follow-up architectural services if people are interested in that. And some of the many consulting type services that we routinely do are intensive surveys, National Register nominations, and things like that. Throughout, you're going to see pictures of projects in Green Bay that maybe we have worked on or are working on, just to show our familiarity. This particular building is on Adams Street, and it was recently listed in the Downtown Historic District. And we are currently working on a historic tax credit project. So I might look familiar to some of you because I think we were maybe here in April to get your approval on the work that was being done to the exterior of this building. There are 7 people total in our office. There are 3 that would primarily be associated with this job. The other 4 would assist as we need them. So I'm Jennifer Lurkey. I'm owner of the firm, president and principal. 18 years I've been working on historic preservation consulting. 18 years ago was my very first intensive survey. We've done 21 intensive surveys, 47 National Register nominations, 16 historic tax credit applications. Rowan Davidson is another member of our staff. He's been working with us for the last 7 years. And during that time, he's worked on 12 different intensive surveys, 35 National Register nominations, and 9 historic tax credit applications. And then also Bob Short in our office has been working with me while we were both employed at another firm. So I've been working with him probably for 15 or 16 years, but he has 10 years of experience specifically doing preservation consulting work, including 18 intensive surveys, 14 National Register nominations, and 16 historic tax credit applications. So I think you'll find that we are very well experienced. And delving into that experience a bit, you could see in our documents in response to the RFP that we've worked on numerous intensive surveys, and several of them were multi-year, multi-phase intensive surveys, just like what you're planning to do here. Now, Green Bay obviously would be the largest one, but you can see that it is something that we routinely do. During those intensive surveys, we've identified over 13,000 in these communities, 60 historic districts, 47 farmsteads, and 450 properties that are individually eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And also we've identified one National Historic Landmark, which happens to be up in your neck of the woods in Alloway. Kind of highlighting some of our experience in the city of Sheboygan. These are the earliest intensive surveys that we did back in 2002. Kind of gives you a breakdown of how many resources we found during the course of that. That was a multi-year 4-phase. We basically split the city into quadrants to undertake that. Another multi-phase intensive survey that we worked on was rural Jefferson County. So these were areas in the townships, not necessarily in any of the cities. It was a 4-phase project. They had another consultant do the first phase, and they weren't happy with the result of the first phase, and they hired us for the second, third, and fourth phase of that project. Just to show you one that we've done nearby, we've surveyed the entire village of Alloway back in 2012 and 2013. 785 resources, 3 historic districts, 2 of which they've followed up and gotten listed in the National Register. 13 individual properties we identified, 4 of which they have followed up with actual National Register nominations, and then 1 National Historic Landmark, which is shown here, the Vince Lombardi House. it was fun doing research in Alloway, just because of some of the Packer history, being born and raised in northeastern Wisconsin. So it was fun because a lot of the Packer players lived in Alloway through the years. Anyway, the Alloway is kind of one of our poster children as far as they did the intensive survey, and they have been following up with our recommendations that we had in the intensive survey. They've been following up with the district nominations and the individual property nominations, and they're doing a really good job. So kudos to them. City of Wauwatosa is also another multi-year, multi-phase intensive survey project. They did things a little differently there. The first phase was commercial buildings. So we went through the community and identified all the commercial buildings. If you guys are familiar with Wauwatosa, you know it's kind of like a bedroom community to Milwaukee. So the following phases of that survey were all the residential areas, which are extensive in Wauwatosa. And we are under contract with them to complete the fourth and final phase of that. The field work will be done this month. That would be the only conflict that we would have with this project. But as I said, the field work would be done before we would even have a contract in place for this project, should we be lucky enough to be awarded it. This was just a very unique survey that I wanted to bring up because it's kind of timely right now. The city of Madison 4 years ago was very thoughtful in thinking they wanted to undertake a survey of underrepresented communities. And they identified 6 communities that they wanted us to try to find resources that those communities thought were important. And they were the African American community, Hmong, Latino, LGBTQ, Native Americans, and women. The report was finished earlier this year. It's been highly acclaimed locally, nothing but positive feedback. It's actually receiving some statewide and national attention right now. The National Trust had a little blurb on it on their website a couple weeks ago. And part of this project was also developing a survey strategy so that the entire city of Madison could be surveyed, just like what you guys are wanting to do now. We developed a strategy on how they should go about doing that, which areas should be done first and prioritized down the line so that they can plan for that, budget for that, and seek grant money for that. And then another survey that I wanted to highlight was our Fox River Valley Industrial Survey. This was 7 cities in the Fox River Valley, including the city of Green Bay. This work was done last year. It was the second survey of its kind done in the state. There was one previously done in the city of Milwaukee. We identified a lot of industrial resources during that time, and several 6 properties were identified as being eligible for National Register listing in Green Bay. During the course of that work, we did a bunch of research in the city of Green Bay. And so you'll see in a little bit our familiarity with some of that. So you guys might have some questions about our methodology, how we go about doing these surveys. We basically start with what we call a reconnaissance survey. This is a windshield survey where we literally drive up and down every single street in the city of Green Bay. We observe every building in the community. We document the buildings that we believe retain architectural integrity, meaning they look pretty close to what they did when they were originally built. Sometimes I've heard the story, if the original owner of that building were brought back to life and were walking down the street, would they recognize that as their building? Those buildings that we feel retain their architectural integrity, we will document some things in the field, including the location, the name of the building, the current use of the building, architectural style, whatnot. We also take a photo of each building and we record its location on maps that we have with us. From there, we start doing some research to develop context to evaluate these resources. Are they really important or not? Because of our experience doing work in Green Bay and the Green Bay Brown County area in general over the last few years, we know that there are certainly documents at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and then there's also an area research center at the UW Green Bay Coffin Library. The local history and genealogy department and Mary Jane Herber at the Brown County Central Library are amazing. We have contacts at the longstanding architectural firms in the Green Bay area, particularly BSA. We know that they have extensive archives and that we would be granted access to project lists so that we can correctly attribute certain architects and architecture firms to certain buildings that we may identify during the process. Any local historical societies, obviously the city of Green Bay, we're going to be looking for any kind of building permit records that are around, assessors data, things that give original dates of construction. Sometimes we're lucky enough that building inspection departments sometimes keep a log that says who the architect was, who the builder was. And so we can oftentimes glean a lot of information out of that. Then there's the Brown County Courthouse if we have to get into any deed type of research. And the Neville Public Museum has a fantastic photo collection there too. These are all sources that we're familiar with because of the work that we've done. Now, when we go into evaluating the properties, we're looking primarily at two things: the architectural integrity and then the historic significance. And I'm sure you guys have heard about the National Register criteria, where these buildings need to be associated with significant events, significant persons, significant architectural styles, construction methodologies, or archaeology is kind of criteria D. These types of reports are generally not undertaken for criteria D archaeology type issues. We're focusing more on criteria A, B, or C. The results of our survey are reviewed in the field or via very intense email back and forth discussions with photos and histories given. Because of COVID, we've kind of had to transition to that recently, but the results are all reviewed and approved by Wisconsin Historical Society and Dinah, who's on here, before the report is at least issued to you guys in a draft form. The survey report has many chapters. You will see them here. You know, they range from early times where we're dealing with historic Indian occupation of the area and fur trade, early government, all the way through arts and literature, social political movements, planning and landscape, architecture, you name it, notable people. And then at the end, obviously, we list the results, so all the properties that were surveyed and recommendations to the commission. Now, received a letter dated September 22nd where there were three things that you asked us to specifically respond to. And one was about our capacity to undertake these phased projects. And I hope in the examples that I showed previously that you can see that we have experience doing these phased projects. I think we're the only consultant that you're interviewing this evening that does have this type of experience doing multi-year, multi-phase projects in a community. And again, to reiterate, City of Sheboygan, Jefferson County, and City of Wauwatosa, we have been doing multi-phase projects for them for years now. We typically, because we have the staff and the capacity, we typically conduct 1 to 2 surveys, sometimes more, in any given year. So we definitely have the capacity to do multiple surveys in a year. We do have, as I said earlier, 3 staff members that work very consistently on projects like this. Between the 3 of us, we've got over 35 years of combined experience doing intensive surveys. We meet the Secretary of the Interior qualification standards in 3 areas. Actually, I think we meet, in 3 areas, not just 1, including architecture, historic architecture, and architectural history. These all have differing education and experience requirements. And then we have also 4 additional staff members that assist us as we need it. So I think our capacity is definitely there. We can talk more about project phasing and what the city's goals are as far as how quickly you'd like to get it done, or if you do want to stretch it out so you can go after that CLG funding consistently every year, or if there would be some funding from the city itself that we could surveys. And honestly, if you wanted to really ramp it up, we could probably do the whole city, but we would need about 12 to 15 months to do that. If for some reason there was a money tree shaken and the funding was available for that. But I just want you to know that we would expect to have some conversations with you to develop that survey strategy. So in our, as I mentioned, when we did our work with the City of Madison most recently on their historic preservation plan, we developed a survey strategy for them. Typically, how it worked for Madison is we started at their historic core. It's where the most updates had happened to buildings. It's where the most developmental pressure tends to be in communities and where the most active demolitions are happening. And so it tends to be the area that needs to be protected the most. So it's always best to have that area current and surveyed. So how it worked out in Madison is with that criteria, we started at the core and then we worked our way out to the surrounding neighborhoods. We worked with their GIS department, who was able to give us maps of the development of the city. It included the ages of the building. They had it color coded, and it was really easy to start picking out how the city spread out from that core during its development so that we could start moving out from there. Do we want to go east more? Do we want to go west more? You know, because Madison is sort of set up on this east. It's really more like northeast, southwest. But and Green Bay has a similar kind of thing. You got your east side and your west side as well. So we would probably expect that same thing. Maybe some discussions if you guys have that kind of GIS information. We also overlaid that with neighborhood maps, voting district maps, so we could see where the natural boundaries are. And we would do the survey areas that are set on natural boundaries. It makes it really easy for the city to then send notices if we're going to have a kickoff meeting or a final presentation meeting to say, okay, we did, you know, the 8th ward or the 7th ward. It's really easy for you guys to send your notifications if we try to group things or cluster things that way. You know, we might be looking at where the subdivisions of neighborhood associations are, plats, and just neighborhoods that are typically understood by the residents. And we try to work those boundaries. So this was a map that we had kind of developed loosely, thinking that there might be 9 phases to this survey to complete it, you know, and loosely where those boundaries would be. And you can see we started in the center and then kind of worked our way out. But again, this would all be up to discussion. We would sit down with the commission to work through what is the best solution for City of Green Bay. And then as far as the staff, commission, and volunteers, we know that, for instance, Jason Flatt, with your city staff, is experienced and trained in this type of thing. We would have absolutely no problem working with Jason if he had availability to help or assist in any way on this project. Obviously, we're going to be reaching out to a variety of city departments. When we get started on these projects, we actually notify the police department. We tell them who we are, what we look like, the vehicles that we're going to be driving, because we've had some interesting experiences in other communities, because we can look very strange. We're driving slowly, we're taking pictures of buildings, and we have had people call the cops on us. And in that community, they knew what we were doing, and they would assure the people that we're not creepers. and stalkers. And so, we start with the police department before we do any field work. If you have GIS information available, we're going to want to work with them. We're going to want to work with your building inspection department to see what kind of records and data they have, the assessor's office to see what kind of construction dates they have, and anything planning department might have as far as plats and dates of when things were annexed into the city. Working with community members is invaluable. They give us a lot of leads. They tell us what's important to them in Green Bay, which buildings they think we should be looking at, and then we follow up and do the research on that. In our experience, using volunteers for research assistance has been really difficult. We have had 2 surveys where the city insisted that we use volunteers, and they have been a disaster. I will flat out tell you that. We're working on this. This is our day job. So we're working on this 40 hours a week. This is an aside thing for us. And we're contractually obligated to have it completed at a certain time. So volunteers work on their own time, and they don't necessarily get things done as quickly as we would like them to. They don't necessarily keep their promises that they've made to us. It takes us a considerable amount of time to train them. And not only do we have to train them, but then we actually review all their materials and verify and double check it. So it ends up, in our experience, taking more time than it would be to just do the work ourselves. Now, that's not to say, like I said in the bullet point before, community members are invaluable. They are our tipsters. They are giving us leads on which buildings we should be looking at, who we should be talking to, other areas where we might find information. So, and then, final point on that issue is the Wisconsin Survey Manual does require professional qualifications that I've discussed, so that the survey work is uniform, it's reliable, and that has equitable results. Because that's the thing, we're looking at multi-phases over multi-years. We need consistency in this so that you're getting a consistent product, you're having consistent evaluations of the properties all the way through. I think, as I've said numerous times, we do have a familiarity with Green Bay. In fact, I spent 3 hours there this morning at a project. We have working relationships with the architects in the area to gain access to their archives. We've done numerous recent projects that you guys might be familiar with, including Pete's Garage, which was awarded from the mayor for our work there. We've done projects in the surrounding neighboring communities in Alloway, De Pere, and Pulaski. We have a project going on right now too. And we're frequently using local history archives and area research centers that are in the area there too. Our staff, so why legacy architecture? In closing, our staff has completed 50% of all CLG grant funded intensive surveys in the last few years. We are very experienced with multi-year, multi-phase survey projects. We're very familiar with the city of Green Bay. In fact, I lived in Green Bay for 2 years. So I'm a former city resident. We do what it takes to complete the project to the fullest, even if we go over budget. We pride ourselves on our easy to read professional maps that we include in our survey reports. And obviously, as a full service architecture firm, there's more value that we can add in the future. Should buildings that we identify want to pursue historic tax credits, additions, remodels, whatnot, we can offer those services in the future as well. So I probably went a little bit long. What questions do you have for me?
I've got a couple. Chair, can I move forward? They're muted.
Go ahead, Alderman.
Oh, all right, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Jennifer, thank you very much for the presentation. I read over your report as well, your request for proposals, and very impressed, I will admit. I guess some of the questions I had, you might have answered some of them already, we have a number of neighborhood associations in Green Bay. There's like 44 of them, and quite a few of them are in the central city on either side. In fact, Ron on our committee is president of the Astor Historic District, and I'm sure he has questions. That's probably our most historic area. And I just was wondering if you would help. Like you were talking about volunteers, that you're a little leery about volunteers, but there are folks that have lived in this town that have a wealth of information and pictures and stories. And I think you could utilize that without having it being overbearing. I would just hate to turn that away. Even in my district, I'm an older person on the west side, and it's generally ranch homes and such in the west part of the district. But as you go farther toward the central city, it gets a lot older. And there's a couple of homes that are sprinkled in there. Old farmhouse. There's one that was built in 1874 that nobody realizes it was built in 1874. And there's a story behind that. So there's things over time that I've seen and our committee has seen and others have seen that we would hate to have not looked at. So that would be one thing.
If I could say, don't get me wrong that I don't want their help. Normally, when we kick off a phase of a survey, we have a public information meeting, and we ask people to come to those because they share a lot of information with us at that meeting, and they tell us stories just like what you did. Hey, there's a old farmhouse buried in here that's from the 1880s. It's on this block of this street. Make sure you don't miss that. We get a lot of that during these introductory kickoff meetings, and that is golden. I mean, I've had people say, oh, I've got a picture of my house from the 1930s where it's nothing but farm field around it. Do you want that? And of course, we follow up with them. Here's my card. Here's my email. Send it to us. Bring it in the next time we have a meeting. So I don't want to say we don't. We do. We have contact with community members throughout this, and we welcome that information. It's just having them actually physically do the research, document it in a academic way where there's footnotes and a bibliography is very, very difficult.
Okay, and
Sorry, can I just cut in quick? I just want us to be mindful of our time here.
okay,
So if
well,
we
that's
could
fine.
Wrap it up a little bit.
I'm good. There's other questions that I can hold on. I can hold for now.
Oh, if you still have questions, feel free, Mark. I don't want to interrupt or anything. I just want us to be mindful of our time here.
Okay. Well, I think the one other question I was going to ask is that, we did an intensive survey back in 1988, and sadly or good wise, I was part of that. I worked on that. So don't pick on me now because you weren't alive yet, not some people.
I was actually. I was 13.
Well, you were, but some of our staff wasn't. So anyway, some of the buildings that were considered historic have been they were historic back then, but now they've been altered. And, I worry about that a little bit, where some of these districts look inherently to be historic, but there might be a number of buildings in there that have been compromised. And, that'll be interesting to see how that works, because over time we've things have changed that way. And, we didn't have a historic ethic maybe as strongly as we could have at one time. But now I think with the Landmarks Commission and the CLGs and all that kind of stuff, I think we're definitely on the right path, but it takes time for that to sink into the community. So that's just my comment. I'm good for now. Thank you. Thank you again.
As part of our scope of work too, we'll be evaluating the buildings that were identified in here too, for that exact reason, because since 1988, a lot could have happened, good or bad. And so we need to update that as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Stoyer. Are there any other questions from the group?
Jason Flatt here. I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Go ahead, Jason.
So, Jennifer, I'm familiar with your historic preservation plan for the city of Madison. I was also very impressed with the sections on underrepresented communities. Surprise, I got a phone call earlier this week from my wife asking if the city of Green Bay has any documentation about underrepresented communities in Green Bay. I said, no, that might be part of historic preservation, blah, blah, blah. Long story. Would it be possible to increase the scope of work, if mutually agreeable, to include underrepresented communities, much like you did for the preservation plan in the city of Madison?
Yeah, I think so. It is crucially important, and these properties, I will say, are not always the highest architectural integrity properties, and so they are oftentimes overlooked until you delve into that history, and then you find out they're important for they're significant for their history, not for their architecture. And so inadvertently, it's not intentional, but a lot of these properties get overlooked. And, you know, Green Bay, you've got very strong Oneida. And I think there would probably be a wealth of information that could be had from an underrepresented communities. And if it is mutually agreeable to both of us, we would love to add that to the scope of this.
Dinah, that wouldn't be totally inappropriate for an intensive level survey, would it?
No, and actually the guidance to consultants is to consider that in their reports, that they are in their research to look for that type of information and include it in any survey report. And understanding that the first use is not always the significant use of a property. It could be later history. So it's really taking a comprehensive look at the history of a community.
Well, I'm
Which
always a
is
little...
very important for a commission to understand, because a lot of times they're looking at, oh, the building was originally built in 1880. Well, maybe there was an underrepresented community use for it in 1920 or 1960, and it is now important for that reason. And so I think that was an interesting thing with the City of Madison was, don't think you've got to bring the building back to something that was appropriate in 1880. If it's historically significant for something that happened in 1960, it needs to look like 1960. So that's kind of, it was sort of an epiphany for the commission there a little bit.
So my advice to the members of the commission here is that I'm a little slow to recognize these things, but I'm pretty sure within the next few years as we're doing this, I will realize that I wish we had done this if we failed to do it from the get-go.
Yep, agree.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No.
Very comprehensive presentation.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer.
Sorry, I was a little long-winded.
Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Preserve LLC is up next, so I will be adding them in. Paul, if you want to do the next agenda item.
All right, the next presentation is from Preserve LLC.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us. Who's going to be doing the presentation? I'd like to make you a co-host if possible.
Donna will be doing the presentation.
Okay. So you guys have the full Landmarks Commission here, also myself and Jason Flatt, who are the staff members for the commission, and then Dinah from SHPO available for this. So I will make you that co-host, and then Donna, you should be able to share your screen, and then you can start the presentation when you're ready.
Donna, you're muted.
All right. Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that. I thought I was ready to share these. Hold on. Every one of these seems to work a little bit different. Okay, should be just a second.
Great.
Are we there?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for being patient with me. All right. And Kate, please let me know if anything doesn't look like it should on your end. All right, so we are Preserve Design Studio out of Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. I am Donna Weiss. I am the founder of Preserve LLC. I'm also would be the primary contact and the project manager for this particular project. My main associate is Kate. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kate. I've been with Donna since 2012 and then with another firm here in town before that.
I have 23 years experience. You have in your packet our resumes and our team resumes. So Jill Tournier, our preservation associate, has 9 years experience. And Bridget Griel is our preservation assistant. She has 2 years experience, but actually is in her second career. So she actually has extensive sort of hands-on preservation experience and marketing experience as well. All of our projects, just a little bit about us, which you've already probably gleaned from our proposal, is that everything that we do is in historic preservation, with a large concentration on National Register nominations, surveys, and historic documentation. So we wanted to talk to you more about our specific scope of services related to your particular project. So on the macro scale, we do a lot of character defining feature surveys, which basically looks at properties, commercial and residential, to see if there is enough character for the building to really be determined eligible for the National Register. The work that we do is also in compliance with the Architecture History Survey Manual on a regular basis, really most projects that we do. We have an extensive use and interpretation history of interpreting the interior standards. Because every one of our projects is historic, whether it be a historic tax credit project or a national or state register project, we're very astute at working with SHPO staff, but also with interpreting how a particular building might meet or not meet the standards. Both Kate and I have in-depth experience in historical research and property-specific research, be that persons associated with the building, businesses associated with the building, but also property records such as building permit records. We have extensive experience executing National Register nominations, but also local nominations as well. Most of the projects that we do some form of project management on, and in some cases we're actually hired just to do historic preservation project management, depending upon the project team's skill set. We also have extensive experience working on different types of surveys in large and small communities. So all of those larger things go into the City of Green Bay project, but also there are some smaller things that really work their way into this project at the micro scale. So data collection and organization is critical. We also use a database management system, which we'll talk about a little bit more in our presentation, which helps make sure there's no duplicity of efforts, but also so that information is accurately collected, stored, and organized. We also will be determining district versus individual potential designations and being able to track that in our database system and sort that information accordingly. And then also determining the criteria for designation, whether that be National Register criteria A, B, C, or D. Document organization. So one of the things that we would want to learn more about from you specifically is who will be accessing the study and how will it be used. And as we move forward in our presentation, we will quickly give you some highlights of other project examples of how we have custom catered how the document is organized based upon how specifically it's going to be used. Also photography, we do all of our own in-house photography with digital cameras. Progress reports, most of our projects do have a progress report criteria to it, especially those for municipalities. We also have project timelines and task lists that we actually run as one document that we share with our clients so that we have kind of a running project schedule, but also assign specific tasks to specific team members with an allocation of hours, so that we can kind of keep track of our deadlines and also manage what information needs to be done for specific benchmarks for a project. Report formatting, again, that's really key to making sure the information is easily accessible and digestible. Survey maps, we have quite a bit of experience formatting and utilizing maps of different types for projects. And whipped acuity, which is one of our favorite toys. We do like using it quite a bit and find it to be incredibly useful. Most of our projects have a technical writing aspect, whether that be historical writing or building pathology. And so all of those things sort of play into some of the scopes of services related to our background in your specific project. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about a couple of key projects that we think may have some pieces of it that are really related to some of the tasks and deliverables that you're going to need. For the City of Madison, we recently executed 2 projects. One, you do have in your packet from us little excerpts of these 2 projects. One is the Langdon Neighborhood Character Study. The other is the Mansion Hill Boundary Survey in Madison. And so for both of these projects, we needed to review all of the City of Madison property data for these buildings and also compare past survey data to the current building to ascertain if that building still has enough character to be in these districts. There were also some issues with property boundaries in the districts and district boundaries themselves. And there was also some conflict between City of Madison historic district boundaries and the actual National Register boundaries. And part of our job was to resolve those issues. And the 2 images on this particular slide we put on here because it's very interesting. You'd think that the image on the bottom, historic character, everything looks the same and everything looks historic. But as we move into the modern era, the image at the top of the screen is really also appropriate in that both of these buildings are considered character defining in the neighborhood that they're in Madison. And so it's a matter of determining, based on that architectural style and the context of the neighborhood, really what is the best fit. So for this project, we also created maps and did extensive historic research. We also used a database that we like, Microsoft Access, to collect, load, and all of our database information from all of our field work, which allows us to also sort and export as Excel documents that then again you can organize based on any field criteria that you want to. So, and we can custom cater that to the cells that are in the WIPT database as well, so that again, we're not duplicating any efforts. We can also add cells that are things that that maybe isn't in WIPT, although I believe most everything is in WIPT that could be. That if there's something special as a category that you want to add, it's very easy to add to this database system. So what I wanted to show you here is typically the survey sheet on what should be your left-hand side is not ideal. It's a typical standard way of doing surveys in that you have a survey sheet and everyone doing the field survey handwrites their notes and you write in your initials for who did it, but it's often when you get back into the field, it's really difficult to disseminate everyone's notes correctly. And so what we like to do is, and this was catered specifically for the Madison project, and we did it for both Langdon and the Mansion Hill field survey work, is we can actually use a tablet with a stylus and a keyboard in the field and enter all of our data without having to handwrite. And it's not because we're lazy, it's simply because when it's raining or it's cold or you can't read someone's handwriting, there's too much writing on proper data to have data come into the database that isn't accurate. And one thing that we find when we review old survey data is that's also when you find other people's mistakes. And so what we like to do is try and create a system for field work that allows for continuity, consistency, but also a quick way to add the information that we need. This also works really well with inputting data into the WIPT system as well, so that we can actually transfer this data into that system in fairly streamlined manner. Let's see. This is just one of the types of reports that we can output from Microsoft Access. So basically here we sorted based upon basically the Mansion Hill boundary, and then it's organized in alphabetical order. But then you see at the top, all the different tabs are the different cells of, address, the different sort criteria, parcel number, building type, historic district, current designation, proposed designation. But then when we move into other types of sorting, we can sort properties based on contributing, non-contributing, what district it's in, et cetera. And so based on what you'd like to see, we can sort of add these criteria fields in to make our field work as user-friendly for whatever your future needs might be. And then you can you'll actually get the Microsoft Access files, but then you'll also get all of the Excel files as well. And we also provide the files in PDF form too, because as the future moves forward, you never know what software will exist and not exist. Kate's going to talk to you a little bit about this particular project. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, so for this project, we surveyed about a 15 block area to look at the buildings in that district, potential district, and identify which helped tell a story that we could make a solid argument for, and also identify where there were too many missing teeth to really make a cohesive district. So we ended up with a smaller district in that survey area, which is the 27th and Wells National Historic District. We nominated successfully that district to the National Register, and that included a lot of extensive research on the development of sort of outside the commercial core commercial areas within cities in Wisconsin. And then we looked at what were character defining features of that district and ended up doing 5 separate historic tax credit nominations for that district and an individual nomination for a school that was located as part of that survey, but identified as not part of this commercial district. I'll let you take it back over, Donna.
So this project, I wanted to talk to you about some work that there's actually 2 projects represented here, and I just quickly wanted to talk to you about them because they were done for the City of Wauwatosa's Historic Preservation Commission. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how the approach for these 2 projects was specifically catered to working with the Historic Preservation Commission. I actually myself worked one-on-one with one of the key Historic Preservation Commission members on both of these projects because she was also the executive director of the local historic museum. And so she had basically all the goods. She had all the great information on where to find the best, most accurate historic information on Wauwatosa. This is also one of those projects, both of these projects, where old survey data didn't necessarily provide even a glimpse at what we were looking for. And so this first project that's on this first screen is they wanted to create a walking tour based on some of the prominent architectural styles that they had. So they wanted to keep it to approximately 2 to 3, but they weren't sure based on some of the wonderful architectural styles that they have in Wauwatosa, which 3 styles they had enough of that were concentrated enough to make a walking tour of. So basically an old reconnaissance survey for this project and the one I'm going to talk about next was updated first. And then it was ascertained where sort of these really wonderful districts that were walkable, where you could actually have a walking tour. So not only was there a historic introduction to Wauwatosa as part of this walking tour, but also an overall map of where all of the walking tours were, tour A and D that you see in the table of contents on the right side, but then also a description of the 3 styles that ended up being part of this tour booklet. So the arts and crafts, the bungalow, and the mail order homes. Interestingly enough, there were several people, many property owners who didn't actually know they had a mail order home. So it was really a wonderful bit of research to find and then inform homeowners and give them the catalog pages to the house that they owned. And so this was actually a booklet that is free for distribution to the citizens of Wauwatosa or anyone who stops into their historic preservation office. This next project for the city of Wauwatosa that was done in concert to the Walking Wauwatosa tour booklet was a historical guidelines manual. Most of Wauwatosa is a historic district, and there are numerous commercial and residential historic properties. So this document was intended for use by not only the local government, but also building owners, so homeowners and commercial property owners. So the document dealt with, what are design guidelines? Why do we have them? Why do we need them? And then the Historic Preservation Commission would refer to these guidelines when reviewing certificates of appropriateness for properties. So because this was not only a municipal document, but for property owners, the intention was that it be very user friendly, but it's one document. So no matter what type of property you have, this is the document that you get. So it was intended to be very informative and user friendly for anyone to be able to use it. So it uses a color-coded system, which you see in the tabs on both right sides of these two images, to let you know what section of the document you're in. But it also utilized pictures, lots of pictures, but also text to describe architectural styles. And then you see in the image on the right, it uses text and images to describe architectural features so that there would be a lot of clarity and also a way to sort of educate and inform the public at the same time. And again, the Historic Preservation Commission really worked alongside with us on this project to make sure that it was really speaking to what the community needed and what the Historic Preservation Commission was hearing about what they didn't understand about the process and review. Excuse me, I just went backwards. So wanted to talk to you a little bit about our project approach specifically for your project. So some of what you've already heard is a bit about some of the tools and things that we've brought to projects in the past that specifically speak to those communities and the historic preservation commissions and cities and municipalities and neighborhoods that we're working in. And so this particular project, Kate, do you want to talk about data collection?
Sure. So we find it usually helps to get sort of a lay of the land to begin with. And that happens, of course, by reviewing what's already been done, but also doing some of our own research to see, what is the historical context? What kinds of things might we be looking for when we're doing the survey? And also to make sure that we have any potential fields that we may want to add that are specific to the survey site in our database and ready to go. We'd also be looking through the WIPT records and through, for instance, at the City of Madison, they had their own files. So anything that might exist already to both avoid duplicitous work, but also find where holes might be in that research or where we want to spend some extra time focusing.
So we would really start after we do sort of our initial research that Kate was referring to. We would start the Reconnaissance Survey, and we would really recommend beginning by surveying the existing neighborhoods first. That gives us sort of a review of the precedents that have already been set within the community for the previous studies, and also sort of lets us know, okay, how accurate was that survey? What's the degree of change that we might see moving forward? So it kind of helps us get on the same page with your community. Then we would survey the unsurveyed properties. Something that we also do, which isn't necessary for you, we feel like it's necessary for us, is that we re-photograph every property. We are there anyway. But it also helps us to okay, how much change has happened in this property since the last time it was surveyed? And we also have that place memory when we look at our photographs. So we're like, yep, I remember that house. I remember this odd thing on it. And then we can have more of an internal discussion about it. It's sort of a memory cue for us. But it's a really way to compare prior surveys to existing surveys to see if something significant has happened to the property. Our field work we do utilizing tablets in the field with stylus and keyboards, and load data immediately into Microsoft Access. We find that that's just incredibly efficient, and it also makes for no transcription errors if we have someone just sit and type survey sheets all day. And we also do all of our work executed in teams of 2 so that someone can concern themselves with where we are and someone can do all of the data entry. We also cross-coordinate during this whole reconnaissance survey process with our core client team members so that as things come up, as we're learning more about what we're surveying, there will be questions that come up or a hypothesis that we'll start to draw. And we want to check those in real time and make sure that, okay, is there something else that we're missing here? Is there any other information that you contribute? And so having a primary point of contact with the client team lets us have someone to reach out to, which is pretty important. During the intensive survey, so obviously there's site-specific research, and that's when we really get into more of the, if we wanted to delve into a building's permit records to answer questions, it's when we also go back into our database and enter whether or not we think a building is potentially eligible for the state and national register as an individual property, as a district, or if we feel like it's too changed and it will meet the criteria for designation. The designation criteria is obviously very different between an individual building and a district. So it's important to understand like what criteria those properties fall into and why. And so we utilize that National Park Service determine, what their criteria is for those in determining those individual properties and those districts. We also will review findings with SHPO's office. I know that that's a little challenging right now due to the pandemic, but we have reviewed findings with SHPO in the past, and we know and work with the staff on a lot of projects. So I'm sure that we will find a way to make social distancing in that work. And then we're going to update what we've already entered into the Microsoft Access for what our recommendations are for if we're forming historic districts, where those districts are, working with you on potential names for those districts, et cetera. And then once we have all of that data collected and all of our site-specific research is complete, then we're going to move on into the preparation of the intensive survey. So as part of that, we're going to output the Microsoft Access property reports, and that will give us it'll basically give us the list of all the properties in a potential district or all of the individual nominations with the locations, and then we'll be able to modify maps and get those maps generated based on that information. And then there'll be a historical overview based from early settlement and the physical development of Green Bay through 1980. And then we'll organize the architecture background information to discuss and define styles and forms, again, as per the Architecture History Survey Manual. But we also like to do that in a graphically interesting and informative way so that if anyone's using the document who is not an architectural style expert, they're easily able to understand which styles we're referring to and what character defining features are associated with that particular style, and what fenestration, forms, massing, et cetera, are also associated with those styles. Especially when you're talking about residential buildings in a district, there may be some buildings that have had some things changed but are contributing because their form is intact and is intact, and there may be some details that have been altered over time. And some of that criteria will be determining, obviously, with you as for what, if a property has been recited, if that can still be included, like what are the benchmarks and the cutoffs for what should be included and not be included based on your individual standards as the city of Green Bay as well. And then obviously profiling designers, engineers, builders, that have been important to those particular districts or those particular individual properties. And it could be an association with a business. Again, it could be a builder who built 30 homes in the same neighborhood that all still have their scale, form, and massing. And it also could be the association with a particular individual. And so understanding the developmental history of Green Bay and who some of the social and business leaders are is going to be important to determine if some of these properties are associated with those individuals. So there's a lot of background information there that really feeds into what the outcome of this survey actually looks like. And we look forward to the opportunity to working with you to really understand what specifically those criteria are going to be once we've gone through the research phase. And that is the end of our short presentation so that we can have more time for questions and discussion.
Okay, questions, anybody?
I was wondering specifically if you wanted to discuss a little bit more about your firm's ability to do a multi-year, multi-phase project. We understand that we are asking a lot of someone to do this in such a long-range way, but we have very limited funding sources here at the City of Green Bay, so we'll be fairly CLG dependent at this point. So we would like to know that you're able to do that in the long run, and then also what capacity you have to increase the workload if we do come across other funding sources.
We actually really like multi-phased projects simply because it allows us, first and foremost, it gives us a buffer of time. And usually we're in the opposite situation where we have very large projects that are due in an incredibly short period of time. And so you're really sort of like, okay, we really got to get this done and we got to get it done fast. And that's fine. But it's really nice to sort of have a little buffer in between phases because sometimes circumstances change or reflection actually can help. But it just sort of like it, I think it actually is preferred to kind of break it up into phases on a project such as this.
Donna, can you explain your approach a little bit more with those phases? Is it your intent to do for phase one, the reconnaissance, to literally take care of the entirety and get every property done at that point and then move on to the next phase of the intensive survey per district or neighborhood?
I think we'll know that more. I think the latter is probably more accurate. I think we'll know that more once we actually have completed the initial research phase, because that will allow us to see like what is the totality of what we're looking at, so that we can actually narrow it down a little bit and kind of develop an approach. And again, we'll be working with you in real time on that approach, so you'll be aware of what we're thinking and why we're thinking that specifically related to these properties. There's usually, once we start that initial research and going through the WIPT records and going through the property records that you have, there's going to be some cream that automatically starts to rise to the top, and that's going to form our game plan. And that's usually how we like to work is let's see what we have and not make preconceived judgments on exactly how we're going to work so that we can stay flexible. And then we might actually have a recommendation that may be something you haven't thought of, or maybe our conversations will give you an idea that's something you haven't thought of.
We have a project where the client's priority changed midstream, and we were able to sort of retailer what we were planning to do for him really quickly. I think that's the benefit of being a small team that's used to working together for a long time. We can really shift gears as the client priorities changed and their needs changed too.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. I know it's a little awkward to do these things over Zoom, but we appreciate you being patient with us. We will be following up shortly, so thank you again for your presentation today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have UWM coming online. Chair, if you'd like to read off our next item.
This would be item E3 on the agenda, and it's a presentation from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Cultural Resource Management.
Give you a minute to all log on here. Okay. Okay. Hi, guys. Who from your team is going to be leading the presentation today?
I will be.
I will make you a co-host then, so that way you're able to share out your screen. So who you guys have available in front of you is our entire Landmarks Commission, myself and Jason Flatt, who are staff members for the Landmarks Commission, and then Dinah from the SHPO office. So whenever you're ready, you can share out your presentation and begin whenever you're comfortable.
There we go. All right. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay. I always have to ask about this new technology. So hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to speak. This is a really exciting project, and we are excited to tell you a little bit about ourselves and then talk through how we envision this project might go. My name is Justin Miller. I'm an architectural historian at UWM CRM. UWM Cultural Resource Management was founded about 25 years ago. No, I'm sorry, I can't do math in my head. 1974, 45 years ago. We do consulting services to the public. Our organization has about 24 full-time employees. We also have 10 support staff, and we all come from a variety of backgrounds. We have architectural historians, we have archaeologists, who are the division of our firm. We have GIS technicians, we have public history specialists, we have a graphic designer. So we really are also a disciplinary organization. We are part of the University of Wisconsin system, which gives us access to the UW system library and all of the other resources that comes along with being part of the UW system. So we provide a full range of historic preservation services, intensive surveys like this one, a lot of National Register nominations. We do historic tax credit preparation for private clients. And then we also do some federal and state level historic preservation compliance projects. And that can be anything from road work to bridge replacements to cell tower installation, stuff like that. I was actually up in Green Bay not too long ago to work on some compliance projects that involved replacing gas lines. So it gives us a chance to get out into communities and see what kind of resources are out there. Each of our 3 architectural historians typically takes on one large-scale project a year, and then we work on multiple smaller projects a year. Projects, particularly roadwork projects, tend to go on for quite a few years. So we are used to long-term projects. I have an airport project that I've been working on since 2013 with no end in sight yet. So we do consulting work for various federal and state agencies, the Historical Society, the Department of Transportation, the DNR, things like that. We also do work for private individuals and companies. And then we also do work with counties and municipalities. Now, one of the things that sets us apart from other consulting firms is that when we work with agencies or municipalities, we do not charge profit, and our overhead rate is essentially 0. So basically, we are able to provide the work to you at cost, which can be really useful in projects like this that have a fixed budget, because we are able to make those grant dollars go further for you. So I'd just like to talk briefly about 3 similar projects, maybe provide a little more scope of what we do. One project that we completed recently was an intensive survey update for the city of Superior. They had a previous intensive survey completed in 1983, and they wanted to update that. So as part of this, there had been about 600 buildings included in the previous survey. As part of our work for this, we identified about 300 new buildings to be included, and that included 4 historic districts that were eligible for the National Register, and then about 14 individual properties that were eligible for the National Register as well. Probably the most important thing we learned from this survey was to time your field work appropriately. We did this field work in January and February, and believe it or not, Superior in January is even colder than Green Bay in January, which is saying a lot. So another survey we did recently was in the city of Prairie du Chien. This was a brand new intensive survey. They hadn't had one before. So we had to create all the context chapters for it. As part of the survey, we surveyed about 400 buildings and identified 3 historic districts and about 19 individual properties for the National Register. The last project I want to talk about is, it's a little bit different than the other 2. This was a Fanatic survey of all of the existing and former public school buildings in the city of Milwaukee. This survey actually came about because of a recent change in state law that makes it easier to redevelop the Milwaukee Public Schools into other kinds of buildings, adaptive reuse. So we worked with the State Historical Society on this. When we started the project, there were about 60 previously identified schools, and 11 of those had already been listed in the National Register. One of our big challenges was compiling a list of both the existing schools as well as schools that had been sold out of the school district system. They sort of dropped off the radar. So it was kind of a challenge to piece together various names and various addresses over the years and put together a list of all of these schools. So in the end, we ended up surveying about 120 new schools in addition to those 60 that had already been identified. And we determined that about 28 of them were eligible for the National Register and for historic tax credits for adaptive reuse. One of the more interesting things that came out of this survey was that we had to look at important resources that had occurred since World War II, post-war resources in the Milwaukee School District. And one of the big stories, the big themes of things that were happening in the Milwaukee Public Schools at this time was the desegregation case. So it's sort of a difficult history in some respects, but we had to work through and identify what resources were important because of their association, both with the segregation of schools, the practices that the school board undertook, as well as the desegregation efforts that took place after the Supreme Court ruling. So I'd just like to talk briefly about the process of this intensive survey. I'm assuming that the previous presentation covered this as well, so I won't get bogged down too much in this. So the main activities that we'll be doing as part of this is to update the themes and the historic contexts, to provide the background for evaluating the resources that we're looking at. Some of these have changed since that last intensive survey, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. Probably the biggest part of the intensive survey is to go out and do this street by street field survey. I mean, you walk, you photograph every building that meets the survey criteria, you record pertinent data for it, like addresses, construction date, what kind of materials it has, architectural style, that kind of stuff. And then all of that data, along with the photographs, gets entered into the Wisconsin History Database. Now, in some of our previous projects, we've actually been able to work out a streamlined system for both collecting the data in the field through the use of handheld GIS devices, and then processing all that data very efficiently on the back end on our part, and then providing the data to the Wisconsin Historical Society. And it really saves a lot of time in the process instead of having to manually enter all of the information into the database. We're just able to provide the batch data and the batch photographs as well. Another portion of this is then to look at the resources that might be eligible for the National Register and to do a little bit more in-depth research and provide some evaluation on their eligibility. So what we would be providing to you as part of the project would be the survey mapping. Typically, we provide both hard copy maps as well as geospatial data, and we are happy to provide any kind of a GIS data, whatever is the easiest and the most useful for you to use. During the process, we also usually provide a draft chapter of the intensive survey report to look over, get some feedback on. And then at the end, we provide the printed and bound final copies of the intensive survey report. So the way that we envisioned tackling this phase one was to spend the bulk of the time of the first phase updating the thematic context chapters. So I mentioned earlier, there have been some additional themes since that earlier survey. Two of the biggest ones are buildings that were not yet 40 years of age when that survey was done. So we're looking at a lot of like post-World War II resources, branches, split levels, probably even entire subdivisions. Another major thematic context that wasn't really addressed fully in the previous survey is underrepresented communities. So we are looking at African American, Latinx communities, the Hmong community, Native Americans, contributions of women, the LGBT community, and those really need to be sort of explored more to find out what resources are associated with them and are significant. So like I said, we probably envision spending the larger part of the first phase updating those context chapters. The other thing we would do would be to start doing the field survey by area. For our purposes, we divided up the city based on its neighborhood associations to sort of kind of estimate how we could start tackling these survey areas. But really the order in which we would survey them would depend on what you as a commission are hoping to get out of this intensive survey. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and maybe we can discuss it at the end. So obviously this is a really big project. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for some collaboration with city staff, with the Landmarks Commission staff, and then with volunteers, either from your commission or neighborhood volunteers. Two of the things that came to mind immediately were doing some of the site-specific building research. That's things like pulling building permits, finding archival materials, finding out the history of a subdivision, finding historic photos, things like that. Another area that we do anticipate needing some collaboration with is the outreach to the underrepresented communities. Sometimes resources that are important to a community are not immediately obvious to an outsider if we're not part of that community. So it's really important to make those connections up as soon as possible and have lots of dialogue and conversation and figure out what is important to these communities so that we can evaluate their significance. I'm sure there's other possibilities for volunteer involvement. I think that's something that would need to explore further as we get into this. But I think because of the size and the scope of the project, but there's really a lot of great opportunities for that. So just briefly, I would like to talk about the business of what to survey and the order in which to do it. So like I said, I think it depends, a lot depends on what are your most important priorities getting out of this intensive survey. So some of the most common benefits that come out of an intensive survey are to identify properties that would be available for the historic tax credit if they're listed in the National Register. That can either be through historic districts or as individual properties. Another benefit is often to identify properties for local landmarking designation or for preservation planning or other purposes. So really, the order in which we survey these is really going to depend on what is the most important. And I think that's something that we are happy to discuss with you and to explore further. So just briefly to explain how we came up with this little map here. When we were putting together the scope for this project back in 2013, well, last year, we broke the city down into the neighborhood areas based on the neighborhood associations, and then we analyzed all the parcel data mostly to look at construction dates for all of these neighborhoods and to determine about how many properties would meet that 40-year survey criteria for each of these survey areas. And then we broke it down that way. So then we took those, the parcel data and our estimations to come up with these numbers. So these dollar amounts were all included in the proposal that we submitted. Here it is in a graphic form. Now, some of these numbers they're on the conservative side. I mean, we would rather be conservative in these estimates and come in under than promise that we could survey more area than we could for each dollar amount for each grant cycle. Now, it is very possible that after we get through the first phase and we sort of start working out that streamlined data collection process, that a lot of these numbers could go down significantly, and we might be able to combine certain areas. And again, that's something that we'll need to, that we are happy to discuss further, involving like volunteer involvement and other issues like that. So just in conclusion, this is a really exciting project. And we would be thrilled to work with you on it. Our project team has over 50 years of combined experience working on projects like this. And our support staff also includes graphic designers, editors, and project managers to make sure that the final product is professionally designed and on time and on budget. UWM CRM combines the efficiency and client-oriented approach of the private sector with the expertise and thoroughness of the academic world. And I think what really makes us unique is the fact that we are a not-for-profit public institution. As part of the University of Wisconsin system, our mandate is to provide services to the public. And one of the most rewarding ways we get to do this is by working with municipalities on projects like this intensive survey. So I guess on that note, I would be happy to answer any other questions about our organization or our experience, or to talk more about the project phasing or the sort of survey breakdown. So thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
I have a quick question. Given the fact that this is a multi-year project, what is the continuity of staff, given the type of institution setup that you have?
So all of our full-time staff we've all been there at least 5 years. There's not a big turnover because of for other that might be associated with other academic departments. Because we essentially operate as a private consulting firm, our staff is very stable. We all plan on staying there for a long, long time.
You mentioned you had 24 employees and a combined 50 years of experience in the field, which would only equate to 2 years apiece on average. That's why I asked the question.
Oh, right. Well, so actually...
I can add.
Oh, Jenny, did we lose you?
No. Oh.
Well, I think we may have lost Jenny. So actually, the 50 years of experience is our project team for this project. So the 3 architectural historians, and Jenny, our project manager, and then Nick, who is the lead GIS specialist for this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, good question.
And I should add that most of us on this project have been working together for at least 10 years. So.
Great.
Other questions?
I've got something. So I think that in our discussions and in our proposal, we had mentioned that this is primarily going to be CLG funded through the grant program. We obviously will be looking to see if there are other funding sources available. So I'm wondering if you could speak to your capacity to potentially increase the workload if we are able to secure more funding in a certain year.
If we have Jenny, I'm going to let her answer that.
Maybe it will help if I turn off my video. The question is, if we get additional funding, can we increase our work capacity? And the answer is definitely yes. We are used to a very high amount of a highly changing workload. And if we were to be awarded, we would certainly build in that expectation. Justin, can you add anything to that?
Nope, I think that covers it pretty well.
Anybody else with questions? Mark?
Yeah, I have one. Thank you for your presentation. I just noticed on the map that you have 10 areas designated and they're color coded, and I just saw a number of areas that are in white, and I don't know if that's just an oversight or if you're looking at the entire city of Green Bay.
Yep, we were looking at the entire city. We actually used that map from the city, and the colored areas are designated neighborhood associations. Okay. And the uncolored area associations.
All right.
Yep.
I'm bad. I should have known that.
Yep.
Okay.
We're definitely going to look at the entire city. We won't leave off any areas.
I was a cartographer by trade, and I took a lot of classes at Saban Hall, so I just wanted to tell you that. I know the area. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, like to add our next agenda item?
So our next item is basically just a discussion, I believe, on the interviews we just heard, and figuring out how we're moving forward.
Yes, so just a reminder, this is a recorded meeting on public record. We are not able to go into closed session to discuss any of the salary or anything that was put on there. We can hold a meeting that's either in closed session or with less of you, so we don't have a quorum to discuss the numbers. But just a reminder that everything here will be recorded for public consumption, and I bet you every one of those presenters are gonna come look at this recording, so just a reminder for that.
I was gonna, Chair, are we gonna, we have a meeting on October 7th. I thought, my thought was that we were gonna talk about it then, but just asking. As far as our thoughts, I'm involved in a lot of closed sessions, so I understand Stephanie's comment, and I think it's important. I think, especially when it comes down to contracts and such, we need to do it right. So, and I don't know what that would take. I mean, can we go into closed session now, Stephanie?
No, it was not posted as a closed session.
It wasn't posted. It wasn't posted. Okay.
Mark, this is Dave.
schedule?
Let me ask you this. Is it common practice to go into closed session when we would discuss exactly what we're talking about here, comparing and contrasting the candidates and maybe ultimately deciding? Is that a common practice to go closed?
If I thought about it, possibly, but I don't remember many like that.
We usually
Usually when it comes down to contracts and monies and time and things like that, usually we have to go into closed session.
Yeah, so typically when we're doing RFP reviews of the proposals, these are usually done in a meeting room. So that way we're just able to close the door and there is no recording of it, to have the discussions about the interviews themselves. And then anything that's discussing contracting or budgeting goes into closed session. Because this is not a city-run RFP, this is being done at our will. This could be as simple as we could all email each other and vote, and I can create a form like we did previously. If you want to have a section on our agenda for our meeting next week where we do go into closed session, we can add that language in if you want to have a discussion as a team. It's really up to us, though. So we don't have to follow the standard city process, but when it does come to budgeting and contracts, that does need to be done in closed session.
I'd like to add, I thought it was 3 very unique presentations, and they all have very unique ways of going about their business. And I think that we should have a discussion on our own, discussing exactly what we're looking to get out of this. I think it's kind of hard to pick one of the 3 or say anything good or bad about any of the 3 without really understanding what our focus is going to be. And I think that's really important, what we need to do.
Right. I agree.
I agree.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
So as a CLG funded product, this has to meet the survey requirements and meet the requirements of our survey manual. So it is pretty much laid out what has to be in a survey and what needs to be done. So as the funders of this, that's the understanding that there is a very specific product that is supposed to come out of this project.
Very well.
Dinah, could I ask a question? Say with all 3 presentations, did you feel that they were all in that vein, or is that still, is that something that we can't talk about right now?
So again, I cannot recommend.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying with the criteria that was put out there, can you at least state that the criteria was matched or met by all of these consultants, or you can't even do that?
I would say, I would recommend that you look at what the requirements are and then look at the presentations and the products that are proposed and how they would be carried out. So again, these are all 3 experienced firms, but again, you have to know that a specific product is the end result of getting this funding. The other thing that I would just like to note, since everybody's together, and I talked to Jason a little bit about this, and I was looking at the maps that were presented. I know you're going to think about this in the future. So there are very large sections of parts of the city that are already listed, and so those do not need to be resurveyed. So, you have the downtown, you have the Astor Historic District. And so when you think about how to fund this, and how to break up the city, really taking into account what's already sort of done, and also the very intensive 2019 industrial survey, in which a huge portion of the city was picked up in that survey, so that there are sections that are in a sense done, and therefore not priorities to work on.
Do we have a copy of something like that as far, and we can kind of assume what's been done with historic districts, but it would be nice to have a map or at least see something where we wouldn't be spinning the wheels again.
Yeah, so I sent Jason a map of when we were actually bidding out the industrial survey of what parts of Green Bay we had identified as the high priority areas. Also, the industrial survey, I'm almost positive, is on our website, so you can actually consult that. But also those records are already in our database, the ones that were surveyed as part of the industrial survey in 2019. So these are very new records.
And we do have
So just something to think about as you divide up the city into sections.
You have that, Stephanie? You have some of that information?
Yes, we have that located
Okay.
here.
All right.
So we can share that.
That's good. Thank you.
So my suggestion, I guess, would be that we add a closed session to next week's meeting. And that we, gather our thoughts and come back prepared to discuss this and make a recommendation or an approval then. I know that, Stephanie, that agenda for next week's meeting was approved this afternoon, but it has not been issued yet.
Yes.
So I'm hoping there's time tomorrow to go ahead and revise that.
Yes, I can do that tonight and have it published tomorrow morning.
Do we need a motion to proceed in that direct? Go ahead and do that.
Nope, everything here is informational only, so you guys can just tell me to do it and I will do it.
Okay.
I concur with your approach, Paul. I think that's a good avenue to get this done.
Yep. I agree.
Yep, I agree.
Yep.
I concur.
Okay, I think that's the way we want to go then, Stephanie.
Dinah, do you need to be involved in that meeting at all, or do you want us to handle that on our own?
No, you can handle that on your own. I keep confusing all of our contracts, that if we have final approval of the selected consultant, I can't remember if that's in the CLG or if that's in our full NERC grants. I can't. So I think if you want to have a conversation, I guess after you make a selection, again, I don't want to lead you down the wrong path because I'm unclear which one has that provision of being informed. But again, those consultants are people we have worked with and we will work with in this project, and they'll be working with you, but also so since this is not something that Green Bay has done for a long time. So our office goes out in the field, as was noted several times, when they've done their research. We'll see how this year goes, but typically I would do the drive around with the consultants. We would look at the properties, we would confirm what's eligible, confirm the districts and their boundaries. And as was noted, we've done some pretty intensively now I've been given information. I went to a community, I drove around by myself, and then a lot of back and forth with maps. So we actually vet the eligibility comments that are going into the final report.
Okay, thank you.
I had one other question. Chair, if I may, Dinah, I had a question, and I don't know if you can answer this or if we'd have to do this in closed session. But UWM, when they gave their presentation, they mentioned, they're an academic institution, part of the University of Wisconsin system. And it sounded like they were talking about an advantage that they had, getting the data and getting it over to you right away. Is that, I didn't hear the other two talk about that. Can we talk about that at all, or would that be in closed session as well? As far as the advantages of something like that, they were talking about handheld batch data that they could send right to you.
So every consultant has the ability to create batch data for us. That is something that's open to all consultants who want to do that. They create extensive spreadsheets, and then we can do batch uploads into our database. So that's
okay.
That everybody has that opportunity to do that. I think what they were referring to is, because we have the same advantage too of being in a university librarian setting, is that just the automatic access to all of the databases that universities have free access to. So again, that's just that. But the data, everybody can get us the data in the same manner.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, it sounds like we're going to reconvene this discussion next week. I would encourage everybody that if you weren't taking notes during the presentation to take 10 minutes and write down your thoughts on each of the presentations tonight so that you don't forget some of the key points that you heard. And then we will, like I said, reconvene this discussion next week following the normal agenda items in our commission meeting on the 7th.
Okay.
Sounds good.
If there is no other business, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Any other discussion? All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Didn't think so.
Not this time.
Paul, I'd like to congratulate you. Paul, congratulations. At 1 hour and 45 minutes, this is the shortest interview the Landmarks Commission has ever held.
That's not fair.
All right.
Speed of Zoom.
All right. Thank you, Dinah, for joining us.
Thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So